My name is Karen Chapman. I am an OD consultant and an executive coach. I was very pleased to be offered the opportunity to come and talk at Creative Conversations. What's different about my previous experience is when entering into brainstorming conversations or talking around a topic, in the past I've tended to be with people with very similar backgrounds in similar industries. And what I really liked about this was people were coming with very different backgrounds, very different viewpoints in many cases. And that made me think, really from sitting in their shoes, why they came to the subject in the way that they did. Of particular interest was the discussion around personal values versus corporate values, and how those two interplay negatively or positively. And thinking about really how those two are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but could live in harmony with each other. In terms of the takeaway, my thoughts are about how I could, with my clients, when thinking about social responsibility, is how I can create a sense of urgency in their eyes. So creating a sense of urgency, but at the same time putting it in the context of business, so that you're marrying those two interests together. And certainly the conversation today has given me some ideas around that.
My name is Andrew Bourne. I'm one of the chaplains at City University and a vicar of a local church. I've loved this creative conversation this morning because there's been no agenda. Often I'm in presentations or meetings where everybody's sort of like peacocks trying to preen themselves and show off. But there's been an honesty and a rigour to what people have said. And I've been personally challenged in a good way and a gentle way, but without often in conversations you're just trying to prove yourself, but there's been a great honesty. The point that's really struck me from this morning in the creative conversation has been the way that companies often resent corporate responsibility. One person made the comment that it's sort of a thing you do on a Friday afternoon and it's put by the broom cupboard, and that there's a very negative feeling. Well, I'd say that acting responsibly is acting as human beings want to act, and that actually it's a good thing, and it brings great joy. So we've had a discussion about that, and to what extent can we actually change the agenda from saying this is just something that might contribute to the bottom line, to say no, whether it does or not, we want to do this because actually it makes us thrive as human beings.
I think what's really interesting about this conversation is that as researchers we tend to, and someone made this point in fact, we tend to meet in groups, we're very focused on a particular area and we don't get to discuss the big picture. And for me, as someone who believes in the long view, it's kind of ironic that maybe I don't spend enough time discussing the long view. And actually what's happened today is that we've talked about the big picture, we've talked about responsibility from lots of different perspectives with people coming from very different backgrounds and different views. So I find it really, really interesting, and it is different. And it made me think actually how useful it would be to have these kinds of discussions more regularly, and maybe to incorporate them into businesses as well. And maybe we need to have these kind of things. Maybe part of the way of having the big picture, the long view, etc., is by discussing these issues more readily and taking us away from our obsessions like breakfast and Don Draper. I suppose it's quite interesting. The interesting thing for me today was to hear someone talk so openly about God. And about religion and about God creating this, that and the other, because most people in universities tend to be secular, and if they're not, then they keep their religion at home, or at least they don't bring their religion into the workplace and discuss it in that way. You wouldn't say God has decided that that everyone should be wearing these kinds of clothes, or we should be behaving this kind of way. In science we try and keep those kinds of things at bay. So that was quite interesting for me to have that. And of course I'm more combative about that kind of thing because I am a devout atheist, and the thing, it's good to have an open mind and to try and so I was sort of thinking about I feel like being combative and disagreeing with him, but at the same time I've got to have an open mind and see his perspective and stuff again, and I don't think I probably succeeded that well in that way, but I found it very interesting. And also the people around the table from different perspectives in terms of the corporations that they come from and the roles that they play. So I found it, very, very interesting and very, very useful discussion. The takeaway for me today is really that these discussions should be held, actually, that we should have discussions like this in corporations with lots of different people from different tiers of the organisation. And I just think, wouldn't that be an amazing thing? And we could do a scientific experiment on that, actually. We could actually take views, attitudes, etc. before discussions like these, and then do them afterwards, and then see how long the influence of these discussions actually remains, and if there is indeed any influence. But I think that was a takeaway. I immediately thought of, could we create an experiment where we could have these discussions in organisations and see if it does change people's attitudes, actually. And particularly, there's a big issue at the moment about individuals who raise alarms, and about the ethics or the difficulty it is for whistleblowers. And I think if we had these kinds of discussions regularly in corporations, might that make whistleblowers and people, their conscience, what we discussed about how close is your conscience to you when you're working, might bring these two things together. So that was my takeaway.
I'm Jo Sylvester, I'm Professor of Organisational Psychology here at CAS. I think coming to an academic environment you probably expect to be lectured at or hear lots of theoretical deep discussion about concepts, but this was a very accessible, very enjoyable discussion between people who have lots and lots of practical experience. As an academic I got a lot out of it because I could listen to their perspectives and try and contribute my understanding of different areas. I hope everybody got a lot out of it that way. I certainly will take quite a few examples back to my students and share those with them. I honestly think that when I came to the conversation, I suspect I didn't know an awful lot about the area, and I think one of the learnings for me is about how different areas of, say, management theory, psychology can contribute to the debate of corporate social responsibility, and really how complex and how wide-ranging an issue it is, and the opportunities really to get involved by applying what we know from certain areas about values or about psychology or about human resources to maybe hopefully come up with some practical suggestions about how it could move forward.
Hi, I'm Doug Barnes. I'm a Managing Director at Commerce Bank in London. I came to Creative Conversations today with a little bit of trepidation in terms of how the conversations were going to go and what we were going to be talking about. It's a topic that we wouldn't typically talk about, I would honestly say, in a sort of open forum. And coming from a banking environment at the moment, you know, that sort of corporate responsibility, that sort of the whole issues around that are something that you tend to shy away from a little bit, and banks typically don't address them. But the conversation today has been a really interesting one for me. Lots of different views and opinions, different angles of looking at things, and different elements of theory that have been brought up, and a lot of the more theoretical discussion brought with some factual backing, which I'll go away and have a look at and sort of really get to understand a little bit better. So that's been an interesting development for me, I think. And that's my main takeaway from it.
My name's Marianne Fallon. I'm Head of Corporate Affairs at KPMG. For me, the creative conversation has been very enlightening, very stimulating, very challenging actually, and I think quite different from so many other conversations that I've been in about corporate responsibility, where it's companies, corporates, actually trying to answer the question for themselves. I think what the conversation has shown us is that actually it's not about the corporate dimension, it's about who we are as human beings, who we are as people, what inspires us, what motivates us, what makes us feel connected to the organisation, and therefore just looking at it through a corporate lens is only ever going to lead to a one-dimensional conversation. So for me, this morning's been really, really interesting and inspiring. A comment that really struck me was around the soul of the organisation, and I think this balance between physical, psychological and spiritual well-being. It made me think, we talk a lot in organisations about work-life balance, which, if you think about it, suggests that when we're at work we're not alive. And of course we are, and I think actually this artificiality of divide exists because people don't actually really always feel they can be them true selves at work. They don't bring their soul into the organisation, they bring their physical presence into the organisation. And I guess for me it gets to the heart of social responsibility of a corporate, which is about allowing people to feel comfortable and confident about being their whole selves. And if we can do that, for me, companies must be much more successful places ultimately.